Welcome to Sleeping with the Stars, where history's most captivating lives unfold in the gentle embrace of night. Tonight, we journey through the extraordinary life of a man whose name still echoes through the corridors of time. Napoleon Bonaparte. From the sun-drenched shores of Corsica to the throne of France, from the pyramids of Egypt to the snow-covered plains of Russia, his was a life that burned like a meteor across the sky of history. Born into modest circumstances on a small Mediterranean island, this young artillery officer would rise to become Emperor of the French, reshape the map of Europe, and leave a legacy that continues to fascinate us centuries later. His story is one of breathtaking ambition and stunning achievement, of love and loss, of triumph and ultimate defeat. It's a tale that speaks to the very essence of human nature, our capacity for greatness, our hunger for power, and our inevitable confrontation with mortality. Like waves that crash against ancient shores, Napoleon's life was marked by rhythms of conquest and retreat, creation and destruction, glory and exile. Before you settle in for tonight's journey through time, please take a moment to gently press that like button and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Whisper to us where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. In your quiet corner of the globe, there's something deeply peaceful about knowing we're sharing these hushed moments across continents and time zones, united by the soft glow of screens and the timeless pull of human stories. Also, let your thoughts drift toward which historical figures you'd like us to explore in future nocturnal adventures. Now, dim those lights, draw up those covers like a protective embrace. Perhaps let the gentle hum of a fan create our evening's lullaby and allow us to drift together into the remarkable true story of Napoleon Bonaparte, the island where dreams begin. On a warm August evening in 1769, as Mediterranean breezes rustled through olive groves, a child was born who would one day hold the fate of Europe in his hands. Corsica, that rugged jewel in the azure sea, had only recently become French territory, and into this world came Napoleon Bonaparte, later to be known simply as Napoleon. His father, Charles, was a lawyer with noble aspirations, while his mother, Letizia, possessed a fierce strength that would be passed down to her famous son. Picture young Napoleon as a boy wandering the hills of Corsica, his mind already restless, his imagination kindled by stories of ancient heroes. The Mediterranean sun warmed his face as he explored rocky coastlines, while the sound of waves against stone created nature's own meditation. The Corsican culture valued honor, family loyalty, and courage. The boy absorbed these lessons as naturally as he breathed, carrying within himself the proud spirit of an island people who had never easily bent the knee to foreign rule. The forge of a soldier. When Napoleon was 9, his father's connections opened a door that would change history. The boy was sent to military school at Brienne-le-Château in France, where young nobles learned the art of war. Imagine this small Corsican child speaking French with a heavy accent, thrust into a world of rigid discipline. His classmates often mocked his accent and humble origins, but within these challenges, character was being forged like steel in fire. The lonely hours studying by candlelight, the harsh winters, the military exercises that revealed his natural strategic mind. all shape the future emperor. At 15, Napoleon progressed to the École Militaire in Paris, where he discovered his calling in artillery. Mathematics and geometry became his poetry. His instructors noted his exceptional ability to visualize complex battlefield scenarios. During these years, Napoleon developed an insatiable appetite for reading. By flickering candlelight, he devoured works of great military strategists and ancient historians. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Charlemagne. These names danced through his dreams, their achievements becoming the measuring stick for his ambitions. Revolution's child. The year 1789 arrived like thunder across France, bringing with it the winds of revolution that would sweep away the old order forever. The storming of the Bastille, the declaration of the rights of man, the execution of King Louis XVI. These seismic events created opportunities for ambitious young men like Napoleon to rise far above their birth circumstances. As a young artillery officer, Napoleon found himself perfectly positioned to take advantage of the chaos and possibility that revolution brings. The old aristocratic officer corps was fleeing France or facing the guillotine, creating vacancies that needed to be filled by capable men, regardless of their humble origins. Merit, not birth, was becoming the new currency of advancement. His first taste of real combat came during the siege of Toulon in 1793, where royalist forces had allied with the British fleet to hold this crucial Mediterranean port. Napoleon, still only 24, devised a brilliant plan to position cannons in such a way that they could drive off the British ships, effectively dooming the royalist resistance. The success of this operation earned him promotion to brigadier general and the nickname Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal, a title he would carry with pride throughout his life. Picture the young Napoleon during these revolutionary years, his uniform still crisp with newness, his eyes bright with possibility, his mind constantly calculating angles of attack and lines of supply. He was like a river finding its course, carving deeper channels with each success, gathering strength and momentum as he flowed toward his destiny. The revolution had given him something precious beyond measure, the belief that in this new world, a man could rise as high as his talents would carry him. The old barriers of birth and privilege were crumbling like ancient walls, and through the gap stepped those bold enough to seize their moment in history. The Italian Symphony. In 1796, Napoleon was given command of the Army of Italy, a force that was demoralized, poorly equipped, and facing seemingly impossible odds against the combined armies of Austria and Piedmont. But what the Directory in Paris saw as a difficult assignment, Napoleon perceived as his grand opportunity to prove himself on the stage of European warfare. The Italian campaign that followed reads like a masterpiece of military artistry. Moving with lightning speed through the valleys and mountain passes of northern Italy, Napoleon's forces struck the enemy at precisely the moments and places where they were weakest. Like a conductor orchestrating a complex symphony, he coordinated the movements of his various corps with perfect timing, creating harmony from what had been discord. At Lodi, Arcole, and Rivoli, his victories resonated across Europe like musical crescendos. The very names became synonymous with tactical brilliance and audacious courage, Picture Napoleon at the Battle of Arcole, personally seizing a flag and leading his men across a narrow bridge under enemy fire, his presence alone inspiring soldiers to feats they had never imagined possible. But the Italian campaign was more than just a series of military victories. It was here that Napoleon first revealed his understanding of the connection between military success and political power. He negotiated treaties, reorganized governments, and essentially conducted the foreign policy of France from his field headquarters. The Directory in Paris found themselves in the peculiar position of having to ratify agreements their general had already made. During these Italian years, Napoleon also encountered many of the works of art that would later fill the Louvre. The great masterpieces of Renaissance Italy were carefully catalogued and shipped back to France, a practice that would continue throughout his subsequent campaigns. Even in war, Napoleon understood the power of cultural legacy, the way great art could outlast the armies and empires that created it. The Egyptian Dream. In 1798, Napoleon embarked upon perhaps the most romantic and mysterious adventure of his career, the Egyptian expedition. Ostensibly aimed at striking at British interests in the Eastern Mediterranean, this campaign was also driven by Napoleon's fascination with the ancient world and his desire to walk in the footsteps of Alexander the Great. The fleet that sailed from Toulon carried not only soldiers and cannons, but also scholars, scientists, and artists. This was to be a conquest of the mind as well as the sword, an attempt to unlock the secrets of one of humanity's oldest civilizations. Imagine the scene as these ships cut through the blue waters of the Mediterranean, their holds filled with telescopes and measuring instruments alongside muskets and ammunition. At the Battle of the Pyramids, fought in the shadow of those ancient monuments to human ambition, Napoleon addressed his soldiers with words that would echo through history. From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you. The Mameluke cavalry, magnificent in their traditional dress and fighting with a courage born of centuries of warrior tradition, proved no match for European discipline and firepower. But Egypt also taught Napoleon hard lessons about the limits of military power. The plague that swept through his army, the British naval victory at Abuka Bay that stranded his forces, the revolts in Cairo that reminded him that conquest is one thing and governance quite another. All of these experiences added layers of complexity to his understanding of leadership. The scholars on the expedition made discoveries that would revolutionize European understanding of ancient Egypt. The Rosetta Stone, that key to hieroglyphic writing, was uncovered during this campaign. While Napoleon's soldiers marched through desert sands, his savants were literally decoding the mysteries of the pharaohs. The description of Egypt, the massive scholarly work that resulted from this expedition, would be one of the foundations of modern Egyptology. The coup of ambition. When Napoleon returned from Egypt in 1799, he found France in crisis. The Directory, that weak government of the Middle Revolution, was failing on all fronts. Military defeats, economic troubles, and political instability had created exactly the kind of vacuum that ambitious men learned to recognize and exploit. The conspiracy that brought Napoleon to power was hatched in drawing rooms and whispered about in shadowy corners. a delicate web of political intrigue that required careful handling. The Abbé Sieyès, Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, and others saw in the young general the sword they needed to cut through the Gordian knot of France's political crisis. But Napoleon had no intention of being merely their tool. On the 18th Brumaire, November 9th, 1799, as morning mist clung to the Seine and Paris stirred to life unaware of the drama unfolding, Napoleon and his conspirators moved to seize control of France. The coup itself was almost anticlimactic. A few tense moments in the orangery at Saint-Cloud, some carefully orchestrated legislative sessions, and the Directory was swept away like autumn leaves. What emerged was the consulate, with Napoleon as first consul. Technically, it was merely the first among equals, but anyone with eyes to see recognized where the real power lay. At 30 years old, Napoleon had achieved what few men dare even dream. He held the destiny of France in his hands. The France that Napoleon inherited was exhausted by a decade of revolution and war, its institutions shattered, its people yearning for stability. But it was also a nation transformed, where the old certainties of monarchy and aristocracy had been replaced by new possibilities and new energies. It was the perfect moment for a man of Napoleon's talents to reshape a civilization. The great reformer. While Europe focused on Napoleon's military genius, he was quietly transforming French society in ways that would outlast all his battlefield victories. The Code Napoleon, that great legal framework he created, became one of his most enduring legacies, spreading French legal principles across much of the world and continuing to influence legal systems to this day. Picture Napoleon in his study during these early years of power, surrounded by legal scholars and administrators, working late into the night by the warm glow of oil lamps. Here was a different kind of conquest taking place, a methodical reorganization of society's fundamental structures. The civil rights established during the revolution were codified and made permanent, while a new meritocratic system rewarded talent over birth. The Concordat with Pope Pius VII healed the rift between revolutionary France and the Catholic Church, bringing peace to millions of French hearts that had been torn between their faith and their country. Sunday morning bells could ring again across France without being symbols of counter-revolution, and the rhythm of religious life could once more provide comfort to those seeking meaning beyond the material world. Napoleon's educational reforms created a system of state schools that would produce generations of capable administrators and military officers. The University of France, the Lycée, the great engineering schools. These institutions became the foundation of modern French intellectual life. Knowledge, Napoleon understood, was another form of power, and a nation's strength ultimately depended upon the capabilities of its citizens. Even the reconstruction of Paris began during these years, as Napoleon envisioned a capital worthy of a great empire. The Rue de Rivoli, the Arc de Triomphe, the transformation of the Louvre. These projects were not mere vanity, but expressions of a larger vision of France as the cultural center of the civilized world. The imperial crown. On December 2nd, 1804, in the soaring spaces of Notre Dame Cathedral, one of history's most dramatic ceremonies unfolded. Before an audience that included the crowned heads of Europe's representatives, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of the French. The gesture was both symbolic and practical. symbolic in its rejection of the old legitimacy based on royal blood, practical in its establishment of a new legitimacy based on popular consent and personal achievement. The ceremony itself was choreographed with exquisite care. Jacques-Louis David, the great painter of the Revolutionary era, designed costumes and staging that would have impressed the Sun King himself. Napoleon wore a laurel wreath reminiscent of the Roman Caesars, while Josephine, radiant in silk and diamonds, embodied the grace and elegance of the new imperial court. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Napoleon took the crown from Pope Pius VII's hands and placed it upon his own head. This was no mere theatrical gesture, but a profound statement about the nature of power in the modern world. Napoleon was declaring that his authority came not from God through the church, nor from inheritance through royal blood, but from his own achievements and the will of the French people. The creation of the imperial court brought together the energy of revolutionary France with the grandeur of the old monarchy. Former revolutionaries found themselves transformed into dukes and counts, while emigrant nobles who had fled France during the Terror were invited to return and take their places in the new order. It was a synthesis that Napoleon managed with remarkable skill, creating stability without destroying the essential changes the revolution had brought. The Imperial Guard, that elite corps of veterans who would follow Napoleon from Austerlitz to Waterloo, became the living symbol of the new empire. These men, drawn from the ranks of common soldiers but elevated by their service and loyalty, embodied Napoleon's belief that merit and courage were the true foundations of aristocracy. The Grande Armée, the army that Napoleon created, was unlike any military force Europe had ever seen. The Grande Armée was not merely a collection of regiments and battalions, but a carefully crafted instrument of imperial policy, capable of moving vast distances with unprecedented speed and striking with devastating effectiveness wherever Napoleon chose to direct it. At its heart was a revolutionary concept, the nation in arms. Unlike the professional armies of the old regime, which were relatively small forces of long-serving soldiers, Napoleon's army drew upon the entire manpower of France. The levée en masse had made every French citizen a potential soldier, and Napoleon transformed this democratic concept into an imperial reality. The organizational innovations were as important as the numerical advantages. The corps system allowed Napoleon to move large forces along multiple routes, concentrating them at the decisive point faster than his enemies could react. Each corps was a miniature army in itself, capable of independent action, but designed to work in harmony with its neighboring units. Picture the Grande Armée on the march. Columns of infantry stretching to the horizon, their blue coats and white crossbelts creating rivers of color across the European landscape. The cavalry, magnificent in their plumed helmets and colorful uniforms, scouting ahead and guarding the flanks. The artillery, Napoleon's beloved guns, rumbling along with mathematical precision. And somewhere among them all, the emperor himself, instantly recognizable in his simple grey coat, riding among his men and sharing their hardships. The esprit de corps that animated this force was unlike anything in European military history. These soldiers fought not merely for pay or from fear of punishment, but from a genuine belief in their cause and their leader. They were citizens of a revolutionary republic transformed into an empire, and they carried with them the conviction that they were spreading the benefits of French civilization across a benighted continent. Love and power. In the midst of all his public achievements, Napoleon's private life was marked by one of history's great romances. Josephine de Beauharnais, the Creole widow from Martinique, captured Napoleon's heart during the Directory period and became both his greatest love and his greatest heartbreak. Their courtship had the intensity that only young love can achieve. Napoleon's letters to Josephine during the Italian campaign reveal a passion that seems almost incredible in a man known for his cool calculation on the battlefield. "I awake filled with you," he wrote. "Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses." Josephine brought to Napoleon's life not only love, but also a sophistication and social grace that complemented his military genius. She understood the arts of conversation and entertainment, the subtle diplomacy of drawing rooms and salons. Her influence on the development of imperial court culture was profound, as she helped Napoleon navigate the complex social requirements of his elevated position. But their relationship was also marked by the tensions that often accompany great ambition. Josephine's inability to provide Napoleon with an heir became a source of increasing strain as the empire solidified and the question of succession became paramount. The political marriage to Marie-Louise of Austria, though it produced the son Napoleon desperately needed, also marked the end of the great romance that had sustained him through his rise to power. The divorce from Josephine was one of the most painful personal decisions Napoleon ever made. The ceremony itself, conducted in private with only close family members present, reduced both parties to tears. It was a sacrifice of personal happiness to political necessity, the kind of choice that power often demands of those who wield it. The continental system. Napoleon's vision extended beyond military conquest to encompass complete reorganization of European economic life. The continental system, his attempt to exclude British goods from European markets, represented one of the first efforts to wage economic warfare on a continental scale. The logic was elegant. Britain's power rested on commercial dominance and naval supremacy. If Napoleon could close European ports to British goods while encouraging continental industries, he could strike at British foundations without facing the Royal Navy directly. From the Baltic to the Mediterranean, French customs officials worked to enforce the blockade. But the system proved easier to conceive than implement, requiring cooperation from allied governments that proved difficult to maintain over time. The music of battle. The great battles of the Napoleonic Wars were like symphonies of destruction and glory. Austerlitz, Jena, Wagram, Borodino. These names still resonate with thunder of cannons and clash of steel. At Austerlitz, fought on his coronation anniversary, Napoleon achieved perhaps his greatest tactical masterpiece. Allowing the combined Austrian and Russian armies to occupy the Pratzen Heights, he struck at their weakened center with devastating effect. "This is the finest evening of my life," Napoleon told his officers as winter sun set over the field of victory. At Jena-Auerstadt, Napoleon coordinated multiple corps across a wide front, achieving devastating surprise against the Prussian army. In a single day, the military reputation Frederick the Great had built for Prussia was shattered. Each battle was also human drama on epic scale. Picture the soldiers checking their weapons before dawn, the drummers beating the advance, the emperor himself moving among his men with words of encouragement. The Russian winter. The invasion of Russia in 1812 represented both the apex of Napoleon's power and the beginning of his downfall. The Grande Armée that crossed the Niemen in June numbered over 600,000 men, the largest military force Europe had ever seen. It was a multinational host reflecting the extent of Napoleon's empire. The strategy seemed sound: rapid advance, decisive battle, then negotiations from strength. But Russia proved different from any battlefield Napoleon had encountered. The vast distances swallowed his army like an ocean, while the Russians refused the decisive battle Napoleon sought, falling back deeper into their homeland. At Borodino, Napoleon finally got his battle, but the victory was Pyrrhic. Though the Russians withdrew, they were not destroyed, and terrible casualties left the Grande Armée weakened as winter approached. Moscow proved not the prize he had sought, but a trap, its empty streets offering neither sustenance nor shelter. The retreat became one of history's great epics of human suffering. Through snow and ice, pursued by Cossacks and decimated by disease, the remnants struggled westward. Of 600,000 men who had crossed the Niemen, fewer than 40,000 would return as organized units. The gathering storm. The Russian disaster created the opportunity Napoleon's enemies had awaited. The Sixth Coalition represented the most formidable alliance yet assembled against French hegemony. For the first time since the Revolution, France faced virtually all of Europe combined. The 1813 campaign in Germany tested all of Napoleon's reserves. With an army largely of young conscripts, he faced seasoned opponents who had learned from previous defeats. At Leipzig, the Battle of the Nations, Napoleon fought brilliantly, but was overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Even as defeat loomed, Napoleon continued displaying the administrative genius that had made him master of Europe. From his headquarters, he issued the stream of orders that kept his empire functioning while battle sounds grew ever closer. The Allied invasion of France in 1814 brought war home to the French people for the first time since the Revolution's early days. Some rallied to the emperor's defense, but many were simply exhausted by 20 years of constant warfare. The First Exile. The abdication at Fontainebleau in April 1814 marked the end of an epoch. In that same palace where Louis XIV had held court and proclaimed his divine right to rule, Napoleon signed away the empire that had been the work of his lifetime. The scene was heavy with historical irony. The man who had overthrown kings was now being forced from his throne by a coalition that included many of the monarchs he had once defeated. The negotiations that led to his exile on Elba were conducted with the elaborate courtesy that characterized European diplomacy. Napoleon was permitted to retain the title of emperor, though his domain was now reduced to a small Mediterranean island. he was granted a pension from the restored Bourbon government and allowed to take with him a small guard of loyal soldiers. Elba, though beautiful in its Mediterranean setting, must have seemed like a gilded cage to a man accustomed to ruling from Madrid to Warsaw. The island's iron mines and salt works were a far cry from the vast territories Napoleon had once governed. Yet even in exile, his administrative instincts remained sharp. He improved roads, reorganized the local government, and planned public works projects as if he was still ruling a great empire. But exile also provided Napoleon with time for reflection, a luxury he had rarely enjoyed during the hectic years of conquest and governance. Walking along Elba's rocky shores, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and crimson, he had opportunity to contemplate the extraordinary arc of his life and perhaps to consider what might have been done differently. The Europe he observed from his island exile was already showing signs of the instability that would eventually draw him back. The restored monarchs were struggling to govern populations that had experienced the freedoms and opportunities of the Napoleonic era. The Congress of Vienna, meeting to redraw the map of Europe, was marked by disagreements and conflicts that suggested the new order might not be as stable as its architects hoped. 100 days. The return from Elba in March 1815 was Napoleon's most audacious gamble, a desperate throw of the dice by a man who could not bear to remain on history's sidelines. The landing at Gulf Juan, with fewer than 1,000 men, seemed like madness to many observers, but Napoleon understood the mood of France better than his enemies did. The march to Paris became a triumphal procession as regiment after regiment went over to Napoleon's side. The famous scene at Grenoble, where Napoleon faced down an entire battalion sent to arrest him, became part of the Napoleonic legend. "If there is one among you who would kill his emperor," Napoleon reportedly declared, opening his coat to expose his chest, "here I am." The soldiers threw down their weapons and cheered. But the 100 days also revealed how much had changed in Europe during Napoleon's absence. The powers of the Seventh Coalition were determined not to repeat the mistakes that had allowed him to dominate Europe for so long. This time, they would not negotiate or accept a limited French hegemony. This time, it would be a fight to the finish. The army that Napoleon assembled for the campaign of 1815 was a shadow of the Grande Armée at its height, but it still contained many veterans of the great campaigns. These grognards, the grumblers who had followed Napoleon from Madrid to Moscow, rallied once more to the eagles they had served so faithfully. Their loyalty was not to France or to abstract principles, but to the little man in the grey coat who had led them to glory across the battlefields of Europe. At Waterloo, on that Sunday afternoon in June, when the fate of Europe hung in the balance, Napoleon came closer than many realize to achieving one final victory. The arrival of Blucher's Prussians at the crucial moment turned what might have been another Napoleonic triumph into decisive defeat, but the margin was narrow enough to fuel decades of speculation about what might have been. The final island. St. Helena was not Elba. This remote South Atlantic island, windswept and isolated, was chosen precisely because escape from it would be virtually impossible. Here, Napoleon would spend the last 6 years of his life. watched over by British guards and slowly succumbing to the illness that would eventually claim him. Yet even in this final exile, Napoleon's extraordinary mind remained active. The memoirs he dictated to his companions on St. Helena became one of history's great works of autobiography and political reflection. These conversations, recorded faithfully by men like Las Cases and Gourgaud, provide invaluable insights into Napoleon's thoughts on leadership, governance, and the lessons of his remarkable career. The daily routine at Longwood House was simple but dignified. Napoleon rose late, spent hours dictating his memoirs, took long walks when the weather permitted, and engaged in extended conversations with his small circle of companions. The man who had once decided the fate of millions now found his world reduced to a few rooms and gardens, but his intellectual curiosity remained undiminished. His reflections on St. Helena reveal a man trying to come to terms with both his achievements and his failures. He spoke of his regrets, particularly about the invasion of Russia and his failure to make peace when it might have been possible. But he also defended his record, arguing that he had brought stability to France, spread the benefits of the revolution throughout Europe, and advanced the cause of human progress. The final illness that began in 1820 was probably stomach cancer, though the exact cause of death remains debated by historians. As he grew weaker, Napoleon's thoughts turned increasingly to his legacy and to the son he had barely known. His final words, according to those who attended him, were France, Army, Head of the Army, Josephine, the Emperor's legacy. On May 5th, 1821, as Atlantic winds swept across St. Helena and the sun set over an empire that had already passed into history, Napoleon Bonaparte breathed his last. He was 51 years old, the same age at which Alexander the Great had died, a parallel that would not have been lost on him. The news of his death, when it finally reached Europe weeks later, stirred complex emotions across the continent. To his enemies, it marked the final end of the revolutionary upheaval that had begun in 1789. To his supporters, it was the passing of a giant, the last of the heroes who had reshaped the modern world. To the common people of Europe, many of whom had lived through both the chaos of the revolutionary years and the ordered prosperity of the Napoleonic era, it was the end of an epoch. But death could not diminish the magnitude of what Napoleon had achieved. The legal codes he had promulgated continued to influence jurisprudence around the world. The administrative systems he had created remained the foundation of government in much of continental Europe. The ideal of careers open to talent, which he had embodied so completely, became one of the defining principles of the modern world. His influence on military science was equally profound. The strategies and tactics he had developed were studied in military academies for generations, while the organizational innovations of the Grande Armée became the model for modern national armies. Even his enemies acknowledged that he had fundamentally changed the nature of warfare, transforming it from the limited conflicts of the 18th century into the total wars of the modern era. Perhaps most importantly, Napoleon had demonstrated that in the modern world, extraordinary achievement was possible for anyone with sufficient talent, energy, and determination. The boy from Corsica, who who became Emperor of the French, proved that the barriers of birth and class, while formidable, were not insurmountable. This message of possibility, this democratic promise wrapped in imperial robes, became part of the intellectual inheritance of the 19th century. Gentle reflections on ambition. As we reach the end of our journey through Napoleon's extraordinary life, let your mind drift to the lessons his story offers us across the centuries. Here was a man who rose from obscurity to touch the very summit of earthly power, who reshaped nations and redrew maps, who loved deeply and suffered greatly, who achieved immortal fame and endured bitter defeat. In the quiet of this evening hour, consider how Napoleon's life illuminates the eternal human struggles between ambition and contentment, between the desire for greatness and the need for peace. His story reminds us that even the most powerful among us are subject to the same fundamental forces that govern all human existence: the passage of time, the limits of mortal strength, the ultimate democracy of death. Like waves that rise to great heights before returning to the sea, Napoleon's life followed the ancient rhythm of ascent and descent that marks all human endeavor. His victories were magnificent, but they were also temporary. His defeats were crushing, but they were also part of a larger tapestry of human experience that includes triumph and tragedy in equal measure. Perhaps there is comfort in remembering that this man who held the fate of Europe in his hands was also someone who knew loneliness and heartbreak, who missed his family and worried about his legacy, who faced the same fundamental questions about meaning and purpose that trouble all thoughtful souls. In his humanity, we find our own reflection. As you prepare for sleep, let the story of Napoleon Bonaparte remind you that greatness comes in many forms, and that each life, however humble its circumstances, contains possibilities that cannot be fully measured or predicted. The dreams that visit you tonight may carry you to distant places and times, to adventures and achievements that exist only in the realm of imagination, but which are no less real for being so. Rest well, dear listeners, knowing that history's greatest figures were once dreamers too, lying in beds much like yours, gazing at stars much like the ones that shine tonight, wondering what tomorrow might bring and what mark they might leave upon the world. The Mediterranean still washes the shores of Corsica, where Napoleon was born, its rhythm unchanged by all the empires that have risen and fallen. The pyramids still stand in Egypt, watching over the desert sands where his soldiers once marched. The fields of Austerlitz and Waterloo have returned to peaceful agriculture, their furrows hiding the traces of glory and defeat that once echoed across Europe. In this gentle darkness, let your breathing slow to match the eternal rhythm of tides and seasons, of sleeping and waking, of the countless human stories that have unfolded under these same stars. Napoleon's extraordinary life was but one thread in the vast tapestry of human experience. Brilliant and dramatic, yes, but woven from the same hopes and dreams that animate every human heart. As sleep approaches on quiet feet, imagine yourself walking through those peaceful French gardens that Napoleon loved, where fountain water catches moonlight and night-blooming jasmine perfumes the air. Feel the cobblestones of old European streets beneath your feet, worn smooth by the passage of centuries and countless pilgrims on their own journeys toward whatever destiny awaits. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte reminds us that within each of us lies the potential for transformation, for growth, for touching the lives of others in ways both great and small. Whether our stage is a small island or a vast continent, whether our audience numbers in the handful or the millions, we all have our parts to play in the continuing drama of human existence. Thank you for joining us tonight on this journey through one man's remarkable life. Here at Sleeping with the Stars, we believe that the stories of the past illuminate the possibilities of the present, that in understanding how others have navigated the challenges of their times, we gain wisdom for navigating our own. May your dreams tonight be filled with the gentle rustle of olive groves in Mediterranean breezes, the soft lapping of waves against ancient shores, and the peaceful certainty that tomorrow will bring its own opportunities for courage, kindness, and quiet greatness. Sleep well, and may the stars that once looked down upon emperors and common folk alike watch over your rest with the same timeless benevolence. Until we meet again in the gentle embrace of another evening, always wishing you the sweetest of dreams and the most restful of nights. Sleep well when you're sleeping with the stars.